Title: The Ashes Between Us. Year: 200 million. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The twin cities of shale and merry glass faced each other across a chasm carved not by water, but by a wound in trust. Bridges once spanned the divide, 10 in all, each bearing a name of unity. But when the betrayal ignited, the bridges were the first to fall, not by war, but by silence. Each city claimed the other had cut them. Neither asked why. In this scarred silence walked the whisper of shame, cloaked in twilight threads, their face hidden behind a mask of mirrored shadow. They carried no weapon, only a satchel of unspoken truths and a flute carved from the bone of a thunderbird that had never lied. Shale remembered them as the one who vanished. Merry Glass remembered them as the one who stayed too long. They remembered both. The whisper stood at the cliff's edge, looking down into the fog-choked abyss where the first bridge had once anchored peace. "Still echoes," said a voice behind them. They turned. It was the caller of White Things, her voice a breeze woven with hesitation. She wore robes of wind-stained parchment, and her fingers traced melodies never sung. "You came," the whisper said. "We made a promise," she replied. "I broke it." "So did I." They stood, not in accusation, but in acknowledgement. Below them, the fog pulsed not with weather, but with memory. The caller reached into her satchel and drew a ribbon of silk once wrapped around a secret. "Do you think we can speak it now?" "Only if we both believe." She nodded, and they began the descent toward the ruins of the bridge where silence had once screamed. Chapter 2. The path downward was treacherous, formed from crumbled stone and discarded names. Along the walls, murals told the story of a friendship turned myth. In Shale's version, the whisper was a traitor who spoke with shadows. In Merry Glass, a hero who disappeared when most needed. Neither tale held the full shape. Halfway down, they found the shrine of the 10th, not the final tie of the oath they once shared. It was broken now, but the fragments still hummed. The caller knelt. "This is where I lied to protect you, and where I left to protect myself," said the whisper. They touched them not. Visions flooded the air, moments not spoken since the day the bridges fell. Arguments paused. Glances held too long. Words twisted by fear into weapons. Then the fire. They had chosen different sides, and in doing so, they had chosen to forget each other. "You knew the truth," said the caller. "Why didn't you tell them?" "Because truth without timing becomes another betrayal." The whisper stepped back. "I blamed you because it was easier than admitting I had been cruel." The caller stood. "And I claimed you vanished when I knew you had stayed longer than any of us deserved." Above, the skies rumbled. Below, the fog shifted. And at last, they reached the bridge's foundation. Nothing but ash, stone, and the echo of 1,000 unsent apologies. Chapter 3. They did not rebuild the bridge. They built something else. A platform, suspended by ropes woven from mutual confession. It hung between the cities, not a crossing, but a meeting place. The people of Shale and Merry Glass came not with demands, but with memories. Each brought a story once hidden, a grievance long clutched. And on that platform they spoke. Not all were ready to forgive, but some were. And so it began. The whisper of shame removed their mask. It bore no face, only a mirror. Each who looked saw not the whisper, but themselves in the moment they chose silence over truth. The caller of Quiet Things sang a single note, long, steady, neither joyful nor mournful. It held space. Above, the wind changed. Below, the chasm breathed. One child whispered, "Why did they fall?" And the whisper answered, "Because they thought pain was louder than love." The caller added, "And because neither dared be the first to weep." The sun breached the fog, touching both cities, and the people, for once, did not look away. The final line was etched into the stones of the platform. Clarity is born where chaos burns and silence remains. They stood side by side, no longer strangers to themselves. And though the bridges were gone, something stronger held them now. They called it The Ashes Between Us. Title: The Echo of Honest Laughter. Year: 199,679,486.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Tyndall Prick had a proud tradition of lying, only to spare feelings and sometimes to win bake-offs. Its cobblestone streets twisted like logic in a council meeting, and its banners boasted the motto, "Truth is best when filtered." Neighbors complimented hats that looked like accidents. Children were awarded medals for exemplary effort and almost success. Even the weather reports were curated to avoid disappointing the populace. And into this careful fiction marched the uncrowned king, a man with no throne, no army, and no ability to feign politeness. His crown was a crooked halo of thistle, and his robe bore wine stains older than some trees. He arrived proclaiming, "I am here to win no one's heart, but I'll gladly earn their trust." Trailing behind him was the dream in the teeth of winter, a frosted and spark of wonder encased in a woman who laughed like thunder rolling over snow. She wore a necklace of half-told stories and carried a journal that occasionally corrected her. They came not to challenge the town, but to see if it could laugh honestly. Chapter 2. Their first act was to throw a parade for failures. Not in mockery, but in honor. People walked the streets carrying broken inventions, half-baked loaves and unfinished love letters. The mayor's float was a tax reform bill that had collapsed under its own metaphors. The crowd wept from laughter. Then something shifted. The uncrowned king took the stage and told a story of a lie he'd once told that had cost him a kingdom not through scandal, but through erosion. It wasn't one betrayal, he said. It was 1,000 hesitations to speak plainly. The dream in the teeth of winter read a note from her journal. What he don't say grows teeth. Later that evening, two old friends admitted they hadn't actually liked each other's jam for 30 years and finally bonded over their mutual distaste. In the town square, someone carved the phrase, "Integrity begins with letting your eyebrows say what your mouth won't." Chapter 3. Change came slowly. Compliment cards became honest feedback postcards with jokes. The council voted to rename the town's motto, "Truth is best when shared with kindness, not frosting." A shop opened called Regrets and Repairs, offering apologies alongside mending services. Its tagline, "Say it like you mean it, and we'll sow the rip." At the edge of town, the dream in the teeth of winter planted a tree whose fruit could only be picked while telling the truth. A child asked, "What if we lie and pick it anyway?" The tree drooped, and so the child tried again, this time confessing he stole a spoon once. The tree straightened. He picked the fruit. It tasted like real conversation. The uncrowned king, sitting atop a fence no one realized was metaphorical, watched as the town grew louder, but not meaner. "You are not alone," he said aloud. "Every breath you take echoes with 1,000 unseen allies." The wind agreed, and the town of Timmelprick, for the first time in its winding history, chuckled with its whole chest. No masks, just merriment. Idle. The tide caller. Year 199,358,974.3. Era Early Awakening. Author Jeremy Levan, Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The island of Grinwick was never supposed to exist. A clerical error in an ancient empire's maritime registry had mistakenly placed it on every map, so eventually someone had to build it. The resulting landmass was a hodgepodge of leftover earth, floating platforms, and overly enthusiastic engineers. Its climate was unpredictable, its politics incoherent, and its ecosystem opinionated. Enter Marnie, the name that refuses Kel. Marty had changed her name 17 times by the age of 20, not for drama, but because she believed names had expiration dates. She now worked for the Department of Accidental Territories and was assigned to Grinwick because, in the words of her superior, "It can't get worse." Grinwick greeted her with flying fish protests, a sentient kelp uprising, and an ecological council led by a talking sea sponge named Chauncey. The tide caller arrived the same week, not with fanfare, just a conch horn, a storm behind him, and a fanny pack full of endangered moss. "You're the environmental advisor?" Marnie asked, soaked and confused. He winked. "I'm the punchline. You're the sit-up." And Grinwick's bewildering began. Chapter 2. The island's problems were both hilarious and horrifying. Fashion mimics had formed their own migratory patterns, nesting in the archives. Seagulls had learned to mimic government notices, squawking eviction orders at random. The soil occasionally turned into jam. Marnie documented it all, tried to enforce protocols, and failed with poetic consistency. The tide caller, meanwhile, taught the locals how to compost insults, host kelp-themed opera, and use laughter as fertilizer. He claimed plants grew faster when you told them honest jokes. Photosynthesis, he explained, is basically stand up with chlorophyll. Marnie wanted to quit. Then came the incident with the sea cucumbers. One morning, they formed a perfect circle around the port and refused to let ships dock unless the crew presented a written vow of environmental stewardship sign in plankton. "No cucumbers, no commerce," Chauncey said grimly. Marnie lost it, screamed at the kelp, threw paperwork into the ocean, declared the entire island a cosmic prank in bad taste. And the tide caller handed her a towel. "Not every lesson is gentle," he said, "but every lesson calls you deeper." She stared at the sea. Then she laughed, and the cucumbers opened the gap. Chapter 3. From that day on, Grinwick changed, not by decree, but by invitation. Locals renamed streets after extinct birds. They formed recycling choirs. They planted whisper trees that grew only when you apologized near them. The Department of Accidental Territories sent auditors. It got lost in a maze of puns and were never heard from again. Marnie stayed. She stopped changing her name not because she found the perfect one, but because she finally felt heard by the world around her. Ad Collie disappeared one night, leaving behind a conch horn and a note: protect the joke and you protect the planet. Money placed the conch on the council table, and every time the island faced a new absurdity from telepathic algae to time traveling turtles, they blew the horn, told the truth, and laughed their way into the next solution. Years later, Grinwick was cited as a model for environmental reform through absurdity, and at the island's center stood a statue not of a lyre, but a conch shell with the words, "Not every lesson is gentle, but every lesson calls you deeper," and under that, Sponge with a clipboard, still taking notes. Title: The Architect of Doubt. Year: 198,717,948.6. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The district of Valegrove prided itself on being quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the practiced sort, the kind trained into citizens through lowered eyes, timed smiles, and an unspoken rule. Don't look too closely. Everything worked. No one questioned why. Then came the Phantom with a thread. She was first spotted hanging quilts across alleyways, odd things, stitched with symbols that shimmered and shifted, as though memory were woven into the thread itself. People laughed, pulled them down, forgot about them, but the quilts kept reappearing, and those who touched them remembered. Vian was a baker's apprentice. She lived by routine, obeyed every rule, and never made waves. But one morning she found a quilt outside the shop at center embroidered with a scar identical to the one on her shoulder. A scar she'd been told was from a childhood fall. She touched it, and saw fire. Not her falling, but being pushed by someone wearing a city badge. Chapter 2. Vian tried to forget. She couldn't. The Phantom was seen again, this time on rooftops, spooling thread that vanished midair. She never spoke. She simply nodded at those who saw her, as if handing them a question too heavy to carry alone. Soon, more quilts appeared, each one connected to someone's wound. A silenced whistleblower, a mother who lost a child during a routine relocation, an engineer who vanished after discovering lead in the water lines. Vian joined others in secret to trace the thread's origin. They called themselves the Stitchers. Their meetings weren't protests, they were patchwork circles, sharing stories and comparing threads. And through those pieces, a picture formed, a system of quiet harm, rooted deep and carefully preserved. Then came the Architect of Doubt. He arrived at a gathering uninvited. A former city planner who had designed many of Valegrove's systems, once respected, now labeled a traitor. He brought blueprints not of buildings, but of silence. Every lie has a shape, he said. I built too many of them. Chapter 3. The Stitchers debate in action. Expose the system, confront the council, or keep quietly mending. Vian stepped forward with her quilt, now stitched with every memory she had reclaimed. She pinned it to the city's central square where officials couldn't ignore it. She was arrested, but not alone. One by one, others brought their quilts. Soon the entire square was blanketed in testimony woven not from rebellion, but remembrance. The Phantom appeared once more, standing atop the clock tower. She held no thread, only scissors, snipping the last connection between Valegrove's illusion and its truth. The council resigned days later. An interim assembly formed. The Architect of Doubt helped redesign the district, not with stone, but with policy and transparency. Every public building now held a tapestry room where stories could be sewn and scars remembered. Vian declined a leadership role. She returned to baking, but her loaves bore the shape of threads now, and above the shop hung a simple sign. Each scar you bear is the root of a strength that chose to return. And people did. Return. To remember. To stitch. To speak. Title: The Trial of Many Tons. Year: 198,717,948.4. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The City of Sindro was never quiet, but that didn't mean it listened. Built from stone that echoed every word twice, once forward, once backward, Sindro had become a place where people spoke not to be understood, but to be heard. Over time, its forums became battlefields, its libraries fortresses of monologue, and its citizens performers in a play where no one applauded. And without announcement, the name that refuses arrived. They bore no banner. Their robe was stitched from the scent. Their presence carried contradiction. Some saw them as a prophet, others a nuisance. No one knew their real name, for every time it was spoken, it unraveled into another. Trailing behind came the shepherd of regret, whose cloak was lined with letters unsent and songs unplayed. She spoke only when silence grew too thick to breathe. They came to Sindel not to leave, but to ask, whose voice has never echoed. The name asked in the middle of the grand forum. 1,000 answers erupted, none of them listening. The shepherd held up a bell made of stillness. It rang once, and the noise stopped. In the hush that followed, a child whispered mine. The name knelt, and you will lead the trial. Chapter 2. The trial of many tongues began that night. Not in a courtroom, but across the city. Every citizen received a single question on a slip of translucent parchment. What would you say if someone truly listened? Some laughed. Some wept. Some burned their questions, fearing what answers might rise. The child led the procession from district to district, collecting voices, true ones, not rehearsed. The shepherd transcribed them not on paper, but in the air, where the words floated until someone else claimed them. The world's test isn't a trial, the name told the crowd. To your reply. At first, the powerful ignored them, but when statues in the Hall of Consensus began speaking repeating truths, long-buried panic set in. One confessed to silencing a poet. Another apologized for voting away a village water. The echo stone began to repeat only what was sincere. Lies dissipated before they reached another's ears. The trial had no verdict, only participation. By morning, every voice had been recorded, those of the guarded, the dismissed, even the forgotten. And in that cacophony of raw humanity, something strange happened. People began listening. Chapter 3. The final gathering took place atop the unfinished tower, where the wind carried voices in all directions. The shepherd of regret held aloft a scroll not to read, but to unravel. Inside were every unheard answer the city had ever buried. The name that refuses stood at the center, surrounded by the child and citizens of all creeds. There is no verdict, they said. There is no punishment, added the shepherd. There is only the question. Will you answer differently tomorrow? One by one, people stepped forward to speak not declarations, but offerings. A warrior confessed to following orders he never believed in. A scholar admitted she'd rewritten history to match comfort. A baker sang a song he'd written for a brother who never returned. And the child, the one who had whispered, asked simply, will you hear me again tomorrow? The wind carried the question across the land. The city changed, not in stone, but in habit. People paused before speaking. Echoes became reflections. New laws emerged, not etched in marble, but spoken at every sunrise. Every voice is a seed, every silence is soil, and carved into the base of the unfinished tower, a line none would forget. The world's test isn't the trial, it's your reply. Title: The Song Without Source. Year: 198,076,922.9. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The mountain town of Belfern was known for three things: sharp winds, sharper debates, and the legend of the song without source, a melody said to rise from the cliffs during times of crisis, sung by no one and heard by all. Most dismissed it as wind tricks. Gale didn't. At 17, he was already known as the Flame. Might witness not for any mystical gift, but for the intensity with which he watched people. Listen, remember, he didn't speak often, but when he did, it mattered. He lived with his grandfather, a retired bell maker, and spent his days hauling scrap and dodging blame. Ever since the great rift tore through the valley floor 2 years prior, Belfern had splintered between the farmers and traders, elders and youth, below-unders and cliff-siders. Everyone agreed something needed to change. No one agreed on what. Then the singing began, soft, distant, and unmistakable. The Song Without Source. Chapter 2. The song was neither melody nor message, it was a feeling, like nostalgia for something you hadn't yet lived. Each person heard it differently. Cale heard his mother's humming from years ago, before she vanished during the rift. Others heard old lullabies, lost voices, ancestral laments. It echoed only at dawn. Belfern's leaders called for investigation. Engineers blamed acoustic anomalies. Clerics warned of omens. No one listened to one another. Cale did. He followed the sound with a sketchbook, documenting who heard what and where. Patterns emerged, clusters of shared melodies between rival groups, overlapping verses between families who no longer spoke. The song, it seemed, remembered unity even when they had forgotten it. Still, no one could find the source. And then the cliffs began to crumble. The second rift. The town panicked. People barricaded, blamed, fled. Cale climbed to the highest cliff edge, carrying only his sketchbook and a single bell, and he rang it, not to call attention, ask for help. Chapter 3. The sound traveled, not far, but deep. The song without source answered, not louder, but harmonized. Voices joined, first a few, then a flood. From every edge of Belfern, people stepped out of fear and into chorus. They brought ropes, timber, forgotten maps. not because Cale had a plan, but because his bell had asked, and the town, for the first time in years, answered together. They stabilized the cliffs. Not fully, but enough. Later, when asked what had changed, Cale simply said, "I stopped waiting for the right words. I asked anyway." The bell ye rang now hangs in the town square, not polished, but engraved. Knowing when to ask for help is the quiet act of strength. And the song, it still plays, not just at dawn, whenever Veltrin listens. Together. Title, The Gift That Built a Bridge. Year, 197,756,409.9. Era, Early Awakening. Author, Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. No one lived in the Hollow Market. Not officially. It was a place between names and beneath laws, where goods flowed freely and people came not to trade, but to offer. Coins meant little. Stories, bread, warmth, those were currency. Here walked the exile's comfort, a figure who had been banished from 3 empires but found refuge in kindness. Her cloak was patchwork, each piece sewn by someone she had helped. Her eyes held no judgment, only invitation. Trailing her was the Soul Keeper, a tall, silent presence whose hands never closed. He carried no possessions, only the burdens others had given him in moments of trembling trust. They did not own stalls. They wondered. They gave. "Would you like a coat?" the exile asked the boy shivering near the soup stall. "It's not mine," he replied. "That's why it's a gift," she said, wrapping it around his shoulders. A vendor offered them sweet root in return. The Soul Keeper took it, not to eat, but to place at the foot of the statue of forgotten mothers. Word of them spread not as saviors, but as questions. Why give so much? What do they want? The answer was always the same. We want the bridge to hold. What bridge? The one between hearts. And still they gave. Chapter 2. The Hollow Market began to change, not through decree, but through mimicry. A spice seller began leaving extra pouches for those who whispered their grief. A musician played lullabies at dusk, not for money, but for mothers who had forgotten how to hum. Generosity bloomed. One day, a girl approached the exile. "They say you gave up everything, even love." The exile smiled, but the light behind her gaze flickered. "I did," she said, "but I never lost it." She led the girl to the Soul Keeper, who stood listening to a couple arguing over how to be kind without being taken advantage of. He said nothing. He simply reached into his satchel and pulled out a bundle of handwritten letters and notes of gratitude from strangers, friends, even rivals. He gave it to the couple. "These are reminders," the exile said, "that what you give is not forgotten even if it's never returned." The couple wept. The girl asked, "Is it always this hard?" "No," the exile said, "only when it matters." At the market's heart, a new stall opened. It had no sign, no vendor, just a table and a plaque. "Leave what you can, take what you must," and it never emptied. Chapter 3. The governors of the neighboring cities grew suspicious. "How do you tax a market that gives things away?" they asked. "How do you control people who need less?" They sent envoys. The envoys returned with bread in their hands and tears in their eyes. One said, "They gave me boots. I didn't even ask." Another, "The child braided my hair." Said it looked lonely. The governors retreated. The Hollow Market remained. At twilight, the exile's comfort and the Soul Keeper sat beneath a tree that hadn't bloomed in decades. "It's happening," she whispered. He nodded. From the tree's trunk, a small blossom emerged. No magic, no fanfare, just life responding to warmth. The girl from before returned, now with friends. "Can I help?" she asked. "Yes," said the exile. "Start by giving without needing to be thanked." They did. And the market grew, not larger but deeper, more entwined with the needs and quiet hungers of those who wandered in. A new inscription appeared at the market's entrance, carved by an unknown hand. "The more sacred your path, the less it makes sense to those not walking it." And from that day forward, love was given a stall in the Hollow Market. No one ran it. Everyone did. Title, The Lark of the Liminal Waters. Year, 197,435,897. Era, Early Awakening. Author, Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The border town of Winskar sat between 2 rivers, one that flowed forward, one that circled back. No one understood why, but the locals had long called it the Liminal Waters. Folklore claimed the rivers meant only for those searching for something they didn't yet understand. The archivist of dreams arrived without warning, her boat drifting from the backward flowing current, eyes closed, holding a map made of stitched-together diary fragments. She was known for gathering the lost pieces of people's stories, dreams others had forgotten were chosen to leave behind. She claimed she had come for one memory, a name, the Leon, the Lark of Liminal Waters. He had been gone for years, a bard, a boatman, a bridge between families once at war. His love stories were sung in taverns, his fall whispered in guilt. They said he vanished after giving his voice to stop a war between villages upstream. The archivist did not believe in death by disappearance, only in stories that needed endings. And this one had waited long enough. Chapter 2. She began at the confluence inn, where Elaine's song still played nightly. She didn't ask questions. She listened to the harmonies hidden in lullabies, to the pauses between notes. She mapped them like coordinates, drawing rivers that had never existed. Each night, she read fragments aloud anonymous, unless someone claimed them. One evening, a woman wept as she heard her own lost letter, never sent, written to a man with river-colored eyes. The next morning, that woman disappeared. Not stone, brawn. Others followed. Each person who heard a memory that belonged to them left something behind. A ring, a ribbon, a story. Slowly, the town began to realize Elaine hadn't vanished. He had splintered into echoes, into choices others made. The rivers remembered, and they were returning him piece by piece. Chapter 3. On the eve of the twin rivers' convergence, their rare event that caused days of mist, the archivist stood on the bridge where Elaine last sang. She placed the stitched diary map in the water. The mist thickened, and a voice rose. Not hers, his, Elaine's, singing not to be found, but to remind. No one disappears alone. Every soul without a purpose becomes a weight, a weapon, a whisper in someone else's hands. Then came a figure hazy soaked, real, Elaine, alive, but quiet. Its voice not gone, just shared too long by too many who didn't listen. The archivist stepped back, and the town stepped forward. They didn't ask him for songs. They gave him theirs. He stayed not as a lark of legend, but as Elaine, a man who needed time to become whole. Above the bridge now hangs a plaque of driftwood. Soul without purpose becomes a weapon others wield. And beside it, a bell. You ring it not to call him. They remembered her part in someone else's becoming. Title, the likely tripped over. Here, 196,794,871.5. Era, Early Awakening. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. In the town of Bramblehorn, enlightenment had become something of a health hazard. It began with a local council mandate that every home install a light of clarity orb, an innovation sent to illuminate not only rooms, but unspoken truths. Within a week, marriages were tested, local bakeries shut down over secret ingredient revelations, and the mayor was caught having deep conversations with his cactus. The town was burning metaphorically at first, and to the masked midwife of becoming who arrived by mail. No one remembered ordering her, but she came packaged with a mirror, a small horn label for emergencies, and a note that read, "In case of identity crisis, break everything." She wore a mask fashioned from discarded name tags and walked with a lantern that changed color depending on how close someone was to an epiphany. Trailing her was the blind healer, who wore baubles made of polished charcoal and hummed in keys no one had names for. He didn't diagnose, he listened until symptoms confessed themselves. "I smell scorched potential," said the midwife upon stepping into town square. "We called it progress," said the mayor, holding an orb that now glowed of violent fuchsia. "Progress should not smoke," she replied. The blind healer touched the orb. It cracked, and light spilled up, wild and confused. Chapter 2. The light of clarity, it turned out, was not meant for mass use, designed for monks or very brave librarians. It was never intended to illuminate every regret before breakfast. With orbs now functioning, people began spontaneously confessing to things they hadn't even done yet. "I'm going to steal from myself," cried a grocer. "I once considered thinking about lying," shouted the school teacher. The masked midwife organized a comedic reflection day in which townsfolk were invited to reenact their most embarrassing clarity moments using sock puppets. The mayor played his cactus and received a standing ovation. The blind healer sat in a tent labeled "No Fixes," just listening. It quickly filled. A child approached the midwife. "I used my orb to find out what I'd grow up to be," she said. "And it said I'd be confused." "Good." The midwife nodded. "Confusion is a sign you're not lying to yourself anymore." The orb in the child's hand turned golden, then gently went out. The townspeople began dismantling their orbs and planting them in the earth like seeds. Some grew into laughter, others into conversations not had in years. The mayor retired his cactus, and Bramblehorn exhaled. Chapter 3. The festival that followed was named the Glorious Oops. Bramblehorn leaned into its new identity as a town that occasionally burst into revelation, often in public. They held awkward apology contests, awarded the most gracefully recovered breakdown, and printed T-shirts that read, "Light burns as much as it heals, especially in untrained hands." The midwife and the healer watched from a hill. "Think they've learned?" she asked. "Think they've started to want to." Below them, the mayor taught classes on navigating self-awareness with potted plants. The schoolteacher opened a shop where children sold their old expectations and bought questions instead. Even the town's clock tower chimed differently now, each tongue tuned to a different emotional frequency. The blind healer removed his goggles once just to weep. He had never seen people laugh so honestly. And the masked midwife left behind her lantern in the center of the square. It no longer glowed. It didn't need to. The people had found a different light. The kind you stumble over, then pick up, then pass on. Title: The One Who Was Written. Year: 196,794,871.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Molt was a circle carved in stone, surrounded by mountains that moved just slightly when no one was watching. Outsiders were rare. Outsiders' stories rarer still. No one questioned why the stars above Molt twinkled in unnatural rhythms, or why the town's founding dates seemed to shift in the records from generation to generation. But Lyra did. She was the record keeper's apprentice. A quiet girl with ink-stained fingers and a hunger for answers that made the elders shift uncomfortably whenever she entered the archive hall. It started when she uncovered a redacted journal. Its entries were written multiple times, ink overlaying ink until the paper bled confusion. The journal belonged to someone named Ryle, except in some entries it didn't. Aims changed, dates bent, motives reversed. Lyra brought it to the elders. They denied its authenticity. That night, she dreamed of a man with hollow eyes, standing at the edge of a burning village, whispering, "I was written wrong." Chapter 2. She began to trace the stories whispered only in moles, alleys, and kitchens. Children spoke of flickering shadows that mimicked them before stepping into the wrong bodies. Elders admitted to dreams of ancestors they didn't remember but woke up mourning, and always the same phrase surfaced: "The one who was written." The legend spoke of a guardian erased by his own people when he defied the collective will to pursue forbidden truths. In silencing him, they had rewritten themselves and their reality, but silence at a cost. Lyra's research stirred the town. Memories shifted subtly. People began misplacing names of their loved ones. The stars blinked fast. At night, she saw him, the one who was written, and watching from just beyond the archive's window. He said nothing until she asked, "Why me?" He responded, "You didn't bury me in ink." Then the fire started. Chapter 3. Molt began unraveling. Buildings disappeared in daylight, only to reappear changed. People repeated conversations made sentence as if caught in a loop. Entire rooms in the archive were rewritten overnight, scrolls mutating into propaganda. The elders panicked, demanding unity. Lyra refused. She called a gathering not of leaders, but of storytellers. She read aloud the entries from the redacted journal. Every version layered atop the next. The confusion wasn't a curse, it was a warning, a record of what happens when truth is rewritten for comfort. At the climax of her reading, the one who was written stepped into the circle. He did not accuse. He asked, "Who remembers me enough to let me go?" Lyra stepped forward, holding her own written notes, and burned them. Only then did his form dissolve into stars, into silence. Molt did not return to normal. It remembered. The archive now contains a section called The Flame Between Worlds, filled with overlapping records, contradictions, and marginalia that resist erasure. Above the archive entrance reads, "Every answer deepens the mystery. Yet the stars remember what silence dare not speak." And inside, Lyra writes still, but never in ink that cannot be questioned. Title: The Dusk-Bound Twin. Year: Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Ulrith, dusk never fully fell. Light hovered just on the edge of dark, casting eternal twilight across silvered rooftops and ancient stone corridors. Some said it was magic. Others said it was the will of the room keeper. But the truth lay deeper. Among the drifting twilight towers lived Myron and So, twins of the dusk. Or so was laughter and certainty. Myron was silence and observation. They were inseparable until the day the city's council declared so. The new voice of unity, chosen to lead Ulrith through the age of forgetting. Myron did not protest. She watched and listened, for the room keeper, cloaked in ash-colored robes, had whispered something different in her dreams. Leadership is not found in the echo of approval. It's hidden beneath the performance. Chapter 2. Soan's rise was dazzling. He brought crowds together with speeches carved in glowing script, held festivals of shared memory, and simplified laws into stories that soothed the city's fading minds. But something felt wrong. Each success left a hollow echo. Each unifier's tale removed a layer of complexity, of history. The more the people listened, the less they remembered their own words. Myron followed the pattern. She traced the rune echoes behind her brother's announcements and discovered they were drawn from a vault beneath a dimming spire, a place only the rune keeper could access. And the rune keeper had vanished. Myron returned to the spire. There she found what the city had forgotten: Twin thrones, twin seals, and a record were written. It had not been so. Alone who was chosen, they both were, but only one had been lifted, the other buried. Chapter 3. Myron did not confront her brother in rage. She invited him to the spire. Sol came, confused but intrigued. When she showed him the rune scrolls, the broken seal, and the record of their shared inheritance, his charm fractured. "I only wanted to be worthy," he said, "to give them something whole." Myron replied, "You gave them silence." He wept, but tears did not undo magic. Only truth did. Together they ascended the dimming spire and performed the rite of echoing names. The light faltered and deepened for the first time in an age. Dusk gave way to true night, and then morning. The people awoke with memories intact. Some were painful, some were radiant, all were real. Meyer and some stepped down from the spire and dissolved the old council. Orith would be led not by one, but by many voices braided together. Above the spire's door now reads, "You don't lose yourself, you uncover the truth beneath performance." And at its base, 2 seats carved from dusk stone, empty, waiting for those ready to lead not from above, but from within.